It's time for the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. The podcast you look forward to for all of your news and reviews of the best comic books hitting stands. Whether it's DC, Batman, Wonder Woman, Marvel, Spider-Man, Image, Spawn, Saga, Boom, Once and Future, Power Rangers, or whatever book or publisher you follow. We cover them all here. This is the place for you. That's right. It's for everyone. This is the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. Let's get it.
Hello, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. I am your host, Theo, and yes, I know, where the hell have I been? Sorry for the hiatus that I've been on for the last few months. I promise by the time this episode is over, I will have explained all that to you all. But this is a very special episode to welcome ourselves back here at the Comic Bin. Today, I am going to play back a recent interview that I held with Joe Quesada, the former editor-in-chief, former chief creative officer, executive vice president over at Marvel Comics. He sat down and we discussed his illustrious career over at Marvel and just in comics in general, as well as what the future holds for him and some of the things that he's doing. And we also discussed his upcoming appearance at Fan Expo Canada in Toronto, Canada this weekend at the Metro Convention Center. I am going to be there covering the event, and he is going to be there as well as a guest. He has a panel, and of course he will have a table there at the con. So we discussed that a little bit as well. But like I said, I'm going to play that interview for you, and when that is done, we'll come back and I promise I'll discuss what's been going on here at the Comic Bin and what's next for us. But here it is, my recent interview with Joe Quesada. Hope you enjoy. So, everyone, welcome Joe Quesada to the podcast. Joe, welcome. Wonderful to have you. Yeah. Such a privilege.
Oh, my pleasure, man. Hang on. We got to let the standing ovation settle down. You know, people are still clapping. All right, everybody, sit down, relax. All right, we're cool. All right. I think that was for you, though, Theo. It wasn't for me. But how you doing, man?
I am doing well. Again, awesome. It's just hot here in Louisiana. But hey, yeah. I'm going to be in Toronto at the end of the month, just like you, attending Fan Expo Canada, and hopefully it's cooler than it is here. We're in triple degree weather.
I bet it is.
Yeah.
If not, it's at least drier. So, you know.
Yeah, we're in triple degree weather. When you add the humidity, it makes it worse. So it is no point.
Yeah, I'm not a humidity guy. It's just, but I feel your pain, man. I feel your pain. Will this be your first Fan Expo, or have you been there before?
So this is my first Fan Expo in Canada. I've been to several. My very first was actually in Boston, and when I visited there, and it was actually their first in Boston. I was at that one. Yeah, I started.
No. Was I at the first in Boston? No, I was at first in Chicago. Sorry, my bad. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you at the first because that was, I think that was Stan Lee's last one for Fan Expo. Yeah. But I'd been begging them for years after that experience to come to New Orleans, and a few years ago they took over from Wizard World. So it's been
and I'll tell you, the one in Canada is remarkable. It's insane if you haven't been to it. It's really great. Plus Toronto's just a fantastic city.
I love Toronto. It's not my first time there. I've been there many times, but Fan Expo, and I've been to many cons before in my life as a collector, but they just do it differently. Not to say anything bad about the other promoters, but Fan Expo they do it differently, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. That's again. I have signed a contract with them because first of all, the Aman who runs the show has been a longtime friend, huge supporter, and so I could not support him. But it's gonna be fun, so I'm looking forward to going there. So we got our Fan Expo plug out of there.
All right, out of the way, man. That's right. They'll be happy they'll be happy for that. I love giving them as much props as I can because again, they just do it differently, and I've enjoyed every event that I've been to, and again, I've been to I've been to Chicago. I've been to New Orleans, of course. I've been to Boston,
Yeah.
and I've been to MegaCon. It's to say it's the same
Thank
promoter.
goodness.
It's
Yeah.
the experience is always different. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate
It's,
that.
it's a great time for fans, man. So cool. Yeah. And I'll be there with my booth so folks can look for me, and unless I owe you money, in which case, I'll duck you.
No, I'll be there. I'll be there with money and books to get signed. So be on
All
the
right.
lookout
That's
for
good.
me. So,
Awesome, man.
so 30 years in the business. When it began back in the 90s, you according to your biopic, aka Wikipedia,
Yep.
it all began with that 12-page portfolio. That you presented.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it began a little sooner than that. I mean, I started as a colorist, but my penciling career began with a 12-page portfolio. And I got hired on the spot. And it was a very, very unique experience where, I designed this portfolio, which I actually I used to do this sort of I used to teach creating a perfect portfolio class at some panels. I'm going to eventually rewrite that course for my Substack newsletter. Probably
Okay.
within the next month, I'll talk about it. But it's a way for artists. It came out of being a colorist at Valiant, meeting a lot of pencilers that would come in and just chatting them up and asking them, tell me about, when you submitted your portfolio, tell me the things that went wrong, right? Those are the things that I'm really the most interested in. And truthfully, I think people who are successful are happier to tell you about the misses than the hits, because the misses show the obstacles that they had to go through, and to become successful, right? So it becomes like their superhero story. So I took those lessons and I sort of compressed it into a 12-page portfolio that I got laid off at Valiant. They had laid off like three-quarters of the staff. So, I got laid off and then I created this portfolio. And I'm assuming you're going to ask this question, so I'm running with it. I don't know. But I went back to Valiant and showed my portfolio to the art director, Art Nichols, at the time. I knew they weren't hiring anybody, but I said, "Do you know anybody at Marvel? Do you know anybody at DC?" He said, "I burned all my bridges at Marvel. If I send you to Marvel, they won't even open the door for you. But I know one guy at DC, this guy named Jim Owsley. He's an old friend of mine. He just got hired by DC. He was an ex-Marvel editor, just got hired by DC. Maybe he'll see you." So he called Owsley. I could tell by the phone call that he had no patience and did not want to see anybody, but acquiesced for art's sake. So I ran down to DC, or up to DC. That's right. They were uptown from where we were. I ran up to DC, asked to see Mr. Owsley, and Mr. Owsley came out. He looked at my portfolio. He closed it and he said, "You're good." I'm like, "Thank you." He's like, "I got no work for you." I'm like, "Yeah, that's what I heard." He's like, "Look, I'm brand new here. I inherited two books. I'm developing stuff, but I've inherited two books, and they're both, these really sort of crappy TSR license books." And I'm like, okay, no problem. And he said, he looked at me and he was very intuitive, and he said, "You don't have a job, do you?" And I'm like, "No, I'm kind of unemployed right now, and I've got like a week left on my calendar before I have to start really job hunting. I used to work retail, so I figured I could just go back to my old retail jobs." So he felt bad for me, and he said, "Do me a favor. You see these three characters in this TSR book, just give me an inventory cover. Just poster shot." I'm like, "Okay." So I went home, drew it, showed up at DC the next morning, asked for Mr. Owsley. Eventually he shuffles out and he's like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "Here's your cover." And he was like, I didn't need it now." I'm like, "Well, I got nothing to do. Here it is." So he said, "Okay, let's get you paid for this." So we went back to his office. He was going to get me into the system, but also he was going to talk to Bob Greenberger, who was the managing editor at that time, to see if there were any available jobs. But he said, "Look, I'm going to ask Bob, but the truth of the matter is the chances of anyone here hiring a guy who literally walked off the street and giving them a full-time gig R0, but I'm going to give it a shot. So he was gone. He was probably gone for about an hour, and I was sitting in reception. Keep in mind, Owsley also didn't even meet me in his office. He met me in reception, right? So, because I literally was a guy off the street. So, so Jim leaves me waiting out there for like an hour or so, and the receptionist's phone rings. She picks it up. She hangs up. She's like, "Mr. Owsley would like to see you in his office." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So I wind my way.
Big difference, huh? Big difference than walking out to reception.
Yeah. So I find his office, and he's sitting there, and he looks at me, and he's like, "Let me ask you a question. What are the odds that while you're sitting in the waiting room, one of my two artists on one of my two crappy books should call me up and tell me to go blank myself and quit?" And I said, I don't know you that well. I'm thinking, but I guess pretty astronomical. He's like, "What are the odds that I would give this title to a complete unknown who just walked off the street?" I said, "Totally astronomical." And to this day, Theo, I'll never forget, he pointed his finger right in my face, just like I'm doing here. He said, "So from this point on, consider yourself the luckiest man in the history of comics." And he handed me a gig.
That is
And that was it. From that point on, I never wanted for work. Every project was a step up from the one I had before. I mean, Jim kept me busy, and eventually graduating to something like The Ray. They'd eventually graduate me into something like Azrael. So it's been a hell of a ride, but I never forget that. And also, for those who don't know who Jim Owsley is, Jim Owsley changed his name. He became Christopher Priest, who was the man who essentially, along with Reggie Hudlin, redefined the Black Panther, revived the Black Panther when we did Marvel Knights together. Jim, I can call him Jim because I knew him when he was Jim. If you don't know him when he was Jim, you have to call him Priest. Okay,
that's right.
So just anybody out there, don't call him Jim unless you know him. Jim has been my mentor, one of my best friends, and arguably to me one of the top 3 writers in comics. He's a guy that has been writing for decades, but his voice is always fresh and he's always on point. And I love him to death. So made a great friend and mentor. And, for those of you that don't like me, blame Priest.
He is one of those individuals that I met him at Baltimore a few years ago. He was at the he was at the Heroes Initiative table.
Yeah.
And he is one of those individuals that you could stand at their table for hours and just listen to a smorgasbord of stories on the history of the industry. Just such
he's also such a unique individual. So when I met him at DC, I remember I was dropping off some pages like late in the day, and he's like, "Hang on a second, I'll be right back." And he leaves his office and he comes back, and he's changed out of his suit and tie, and he's wearing like a bus driver's outfit. I'm like, "You going to a party or something?" He's like, "No." He's like, "I moonlight as a bus driver." I'm like, "What?"
Wow.
He's like, yeah. He's like, because he lived like, I don't know, like the ass end of New Jersey or New York. He lived a ways away. So what he did was, because he was a licensed bus driver, he would drive from Metro North. He'd drive a busload of people in the morning to the city, leave them there. Another bus driver would take the next shift, and that would be his commute. And then at night, his commute back home, he would just drive another busload of people up.
Wow.
And he was like, he's like, "I love driving a bus, the power." I mean, he just had the whole thing. But he's a phenomenal musician and songwriter. He is a minister. I mean, just the list of things. He's lived life, man. And that's, I think, what makes him a great writer, because he's lived life and he understands people. And I learned a ton from him. And again, he's one of my most beloved friends and also family. Because my wife didn't know him back then, but now she does, and he comes and stays with us, and it's that kind of thing.
Yeah, I hope to meet him again in September. He's supposed to be in Memphis for their con. He is a wonderful person to just sit and talk the entire industry with. I mean, you just don't. You see a person like Jim Shooter, and you can know they could just spew stuff for hours,
Right.
but
Yeah.
to just sit there with him and listen to his experience, which is totally
Yeah.
different. It is such a wonderful conversation.
Yep. Yep.
Did you ever think that that sequence of events would lead to where you are today? Editor in
Um,
chief, CCO, vice president.
in terms of the business stuff, the corporate stuff, no, absolutely not. As a kid reading Stan's soapbox, I didn't sit there and go, "Oh, that's a job I want someday," because I didn't think that was an attainable job, right? How do you become editor in chief? But I'm very goal oriented. So when I got into comics, I had certain goals that I wanted to achieve, but they all involved the writing and art end of it, right? And things, stories that I wanted to get to, stories that I wanted to tell, the kinds of stories that I wanted to draw and write. Because I didn't come in as a writer, but I wanted to eventually write my own stuff. But I knew I had a lot more to learn on that side than on the art side. I had a lot to learn on both sides, but really it was the writing thing that I realized I needed to get, I needed like a real coming to Jesus with myself and say, okay, how am I gonna, how am I going to achieve this, right? How am I going to prove those skills? So I worked really hard at that, and hopefully it shows in the stuff that I do or will be doing. But it was more about where I wanted to go as an artist, and hopefully maybe someday direct film and things like that. But it was really it was nothing involving like oh, I want to run Marvel. No, maybe if you come in as an executive into the world of comics, you're like, yeah, someday I'd like to run Marvel. But that was not on the bucket list.
That wasn't it wasn't on the soundboard at all.
Not at all, man. Not at all. But I could see how all the events that sort of led me there, in retrospect. If I look back on it, I'm like, okay, well, those successes brought me to this point, and actually some failures brought me to that point. Without the failures, you just, again, they're all part of the story, everybody's story.
And so we get to another part. It's 1998 now. Marvel Comics is filed for bankruptcy, and they approach you and Jimmy Palmiotti and say, hey, we need you guys to do this thing for us. And we get Marvel Knights.
Mm-hmm.
And Marvel Knights just revolutionized that one imprint. Probably saved Marvel, other than the money that came in from DC. I mean, from Disney. But, I mean, the two of you guys, when they approached you, how much involvement did Marvel have with putting Marvel Knights together? Or did it just basically give it to you all and say, go with it?
Well, a little bit of both. So this started with Gareb Shamus, who was he was the CEO of Wizard magazine. He owned Wizard.
Yes.
Gareb had a conversation with the CEO of Marvel at that time, Joe Calamari, or as we affectionately referred to Joey Squid. And we could refer to him. I mean, he didn't mind. He was Joey Squid. So Joe Calamari was looking. I mean, he's sitting in the Chapter 11 seat, right? And he's trying to figure out ways to spark the company. And they had just done that whole Heroes Reborn thing with Image, right? Which sold some books, but was really a nightmare logistically for both Image and Marvel. And there's a lot of stuff. There's a much longer story there. But he met with Gareb and he was trying to figure out what to do. So Gareb had suggested he talk to us. And also Brian Pulido, Chaos Comics, who was doing a great job with the horror stuff, right?
Creative Lady Dead.
Yeah. And the hook with us was like, Gareb's like, you've never seen guys hustle for more free press than those two guys. He's like they're in Wizard magazine all the time because they just know how to get free press. They know the buttons to push and all the stuff to do, right? So Joe met with us. I can't speak about the Chaos Comics meeting. I mean, although, I'll come back to that. So Joe had sort of exploratory dinner with me and Jimmy, and talking about we're just looking for something to spark the line. What could you guys do? What could you guys bring to it? Now, mind you, this conversation is happening as like comic shops are closing everywhere. Books are selling less and less and less. Um, so Jimmy and I come up with a strategy, and we look at the characters that we really enjoy, which are sort of the more ground level characters, but also characters that we feel have been neglected. Um, Daredevil was probably about 6 issues away from being canceled. That's how badly he was doing. They were going to cancel Daredevil. Punisher didn't have a book anymore. Inhumans hadn't had a book in forever and were never able to sell any comic books. And the Black Panther, who is near and dear to my heart, and I think Jimmy's as well, was a character that I kept looking at going, why isn't this character one of the biggest characters in the Marvel Universe, right? And it's a character that I remember fondly from my childhood, because the character it's the character that was instrumental in me seeing that Marvel was writing books about my world and my friends and a world that I wanted to live in. So we put those on our list. It was our initial list. Those were the characters, right? And Inhumans were like, there's something there. There's something really cool, but nobody's been able to tap into it. So we get a second meeting set up with Joe Calamari, a second dinner. And at that point, I lived 3.5 blocks away from Marvel. And the restaurant that we were going to was like 2 blocks away from where I lived. So Jimmy comes over to my place and we have a, pre-meeting meeting. All right, this is what we're going to ask for. And I said, yeah, but you know what? We're going to ask for everything. Joe's like, what? I'm like, we're going to ask for everything. When Joe says, what do we want to do? We're going to say, make us co-editor-in-chiefs. Let us run the whole thing. And it'll be the most successful decision you've ever made in your life. Right? And Jimmy starts laughing. He's like, that's crazy. I say, of course it's crazy. He's not going to say yes to that. He's going to laugh at us. But then we could settle on 4 books. And it'll seem like a bargain. So we have this dinner with Joe. And, Joe says, oh, what do you guys want? And I said that. It's just make us co-editor-in-chiefs. We'll fix this place. Within a year, we'll have it running. And Joe starts laughing. And he's like, how about if we give you 4 books?
You should have played the lottery.
Okay. All right, let's do that, right? And I think he appreciated the brass that we had to ask for that. But so we said, look, these are the 4 books we want, and they were, because we also knew that they weren't going to give us Spider-Man, they weren't going to give us X-Men, right? They I think he was thrilled with the fact that we took books that nobody cared about. So, and for us, there was nothing but upside at this point, right? And the other thing that we asked for, which it benefited us, but it also made Marvel very, very happy, because one of the biggest problems they had with Heroes Reborn was that the Image guys were in California and on the West Coast, Marvel was on the East Coast. It made communication, the whole problem with these books being created away from Marvel editorial. So we said, you know what, and what we want to do, and we were legitimately concerned about this and really thought it was the best way to do it. But at the same time, we could really use the office space. We said, we will move into the Marvel offices. We want to move into, because we would always hear these horror stories from Marvel editors saying how crappy they felt that their books were being taken away and done somewhere else, and they had no control over it. I'm like, we want to be part of the editorial community. We want to go through we don't just want our books blanketly approved. Whatever a Marvel editor has to do to get a book approved, we want to go through it. So that editors cannot say that we are just getting preferential treatment. So they set all that up, plus extra. So our stuff had to be like not only did it have to go through editorial approvals, but Chris Claremont at that time was hired as a story editor. So Chris was in charge of editing, looking at all our stories and editing our stuff, which probably was the toughest gauntlet we went through, because Chris and I would butt heads on things all the time. I mean, we're still good friends, but it was just like, we saw things a little bit differently. And some of the notes he gave me were really educational, but I think, I hope Chris walked away, with some other ideas as well. But we also had free office space. We got free office space at Marvel, which was great because, now we could park everything there. I was the only guy at Marvel who was actually drawing comics in the office. There was a bullpen that would do, touch-ups, corrections, maybe some lettering and stuff, but I was the only artist up there working, which is always fun. and we were editing and doing. It was a crazy time, and but that's kind of how it came about. It started with a conversation with Garib. Then Joe Calamari came in and he just took a flyer on us. And so what I was going to mention about Chaos is Chaos also launched a line of comics at the same time. They had like a horror line of comics that came out when Marvel Knights came out. And I just think the horror genre has never been something that has been like something that Marvel is known for. So I think it may have suffered from that.
Right.
But Jimmy and I did what we did, which is we went out there and, Marvel gave us some press, but we went out there and we started hustling and do whatever we could to just make some noise and get people interested in what we were doing. And I think also part of it was just like people were like, these two clowns don't know anything, which just fueled us to do more.
So be honest. Was there one character that you wish you would have asked for to include with the 4?
Well, yeah, sure. I would have loved to have Spider-Man, but they're not going to give us Spider-Man. No, I mean we got everything we asked for. The whole deal would have fallen apart if we hadn't have gone. If they said no Punisher, no Inhumans, we would have found something else. But if they said no Daredevil, no Black Panther, we would have derailed the whole thing and said, "Yeah, we can't do this," because then I needed at least 2 characters that I felt confident were just not being portrayed correctly that could be successful, that fans were dying to get a good version of. So those 2 were really, really important. But no, we were very, very happy with what we got. I don't think there was anything that we were, give us Spider-Man. Oh, how about Wolverine? We could be great with those, but they were doing okay on their own,
Okay. Well, so if this is something that you can answer,
yeah.
Let's say you could have done Marvel Knights at DC. Who would those 4 characters be?
Wow, I don't know. I'd have to really think about that. You should have prepped me for that question. Because I'd have to put myself back in 1998 and see what was happening there, right? I'd have to really think about it. I don't know.
Well, I will give you into Fan Expo Canada.
All right, cool. We'll talk about that.
We'll talk about it then. Yeah.
Because I want to dig up some 1998 sales charts and see what was happening at DC and what was sort of like low-hanging fruit that didn't feel like they were doing the right thing. But DC was in a different place. Also, DC was a place where it was filled with some really great writers. So I always looked at them to see, well, who could I poach to bring in as a writer to do stuff? So I think they were doing a better job with their library at that time.
Okay.
Than Marvel was.
But we will definitely come back to it. We would definitely.
All right, cool. That's a great question. Man, nobody's ever asked me that one. That's a good one.
What was the weirdest project you worked on? And when I say weird, it doesn't mean bad, but weird in the sense of when you get into the research and the history and you're just like, wow. I mean, was it something like Painkiller Jane or...
Yeah. Doing Ash, and this is prior to 9/11. Doing Ash, we did a ton of research. We hung out with some firefighter friends. I have photo albums filled with photo reference that I was taking, in the firehouse and the equipment and stuff. So I've always been a research bug. I think I'm trying to think of what was weird. I remember when I got the assignment for the Ray. It's funny because I was just looking through some old photographs and these turned up. When Jim Owsley gave me the assignment for the Ray took place in Philadelphia. I live in New York, and I was already 29, 30 at this point. I had never been to Philadelphia, just never been. It's literally like a 2-hour train ride away. So I went to Philadelphia. I just walked around the city taking photos and catching that Philadelphia vibe and trying to figure out what, and again, I wasn't writing the book. I was just drawing the thing, but I do a ton of research in that sense, when it comes to the projects I do, because I feel it adds a level of authenticity, especially if it's something I don't know anything about. I want to make sure that it comes across authentic, whether it's a place, a universe, or a character. Most of the characters that I've created come from a place of like I know somebody like that, or I've experienced that in my own life. Um, and I think the probably it's not the craziest project I ever did, but a project that I committed to, that I don't ever talk about this, but that I committed to, that I was like, not that I promised the person. What was Glenn Danzig's comic book company? Was it Veronica? Does that sound right? Veronica? Something like that.
It was something like that, but I can Google it while you.
But it was a very it had real adult stuff in it, right? And I like Glenn a lot. And I said, yeah. Someday I'll do something for you. Not thinking about it. And then he called in the marker, and he wanted me to do a short story. And it was about this vampire girl, and she's nude throughout the whole thing. And then there was like, when I got the script, there's like this huge orgy in the background of one of the scenes, and I'm like, I don't, at conventions, I've sometimes have fans come in and say, hey, can you draw this character nude? And I'm always like, no, I don't do that, right? It's not that I'm a prude or whatever. It's just I have certain things that I do and I don't do, right? And so I get this script with this orgy scene in the background, and I'm like, I can't draw this. So I hired a background artist who was good at doing that stuff. So I drew like the main figure in the foreground, and the background artist went to town and drew this like crazy orgy scene. And I'm like, that's pretty damn good, but it was crazy. But I could only draw part of that book because it's just not the, again, I don't, people that draw erotica, man, it's awesome. It's just something that I just didn't want, necessarily.
It wasn't
something.
you.
Yeah, it's like, I got a daughter now, so it's like, I'm glad I didn't, and that story came out pretty good. The actual, artwork wasn't bad, but I found myself in a bind where I'm like, oh, okay, I'll do this for Glenn.
So, since leaving Marvel, you've been still quite a busy person, working on some things with Amazon. But as of late, you've been drawing some variant covers for Detective Comics and Batman.
Yes.
Is this Batman we're seeing on these variant covers, has this always been your vision of the character, or has it evolved over time?
No, my Batman has always been the short-eared Batman.
Okay.
Short ears. It's I don't think he's unlike the Batman that you see in sort of Azrael, except that I draw better now. I look back on those pages, and I thank God for Kevin Nolan to ink me and fix some of that stuff. But it's pretty much the same Batman. My Batman tends to be. I think I draw a Batman that's sort of in his mid 30s, stockier.
Yeah.
More imposing in that sense. Grizzled. Under the mask. But the short ears, man, I never got I was never attracted to the long ears. So I remember when I first got the first Batman cover, and Ben Abernathy, who's the editor, I said, hey, I hope you don't mind. I like the short-eared Batman. He's like, no, we're cool with that. I'm like, but I'm thinking about doing something different. What if I do one long and one short ear, right? And we were just kidding, of course, but Ben was like, yeah, I don't think that's gonna work, man. But yeah, I've always liked that, preferred that look. It's the same thing with Daredevil. Like, there's some artists that like to draw the Daredevil horns like really long.
Yeah.
I like the smaller versions. It's just a personal preference.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, I too am a.
What's your favorite?
I am a fan of the short ear. Like,
Sure is, yeah.
I love Kelly Jones, but Kelly Jones Batman with the super long ears, it's not the character I grew up. It works for some people, but it's not the character I grew up on.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing with, and again, no slight to it. I mean, like Batman in armor, just doesn't, it takes so much away from it. I always love that moment in Dark Knight, right, where Frank Miller has Batman say, this thing is yellow on my chest because it's a target, And I just think the fact that he is somewhat vulnerable, uh, in that costume just adds an element of, is it smart? No, it probably isn't smart, but maybe Batman, needs to, likes to feel a little pain to get the edge on, so to speak.
Hey, it worked
Yeah.
for most of his 80-year career,
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
have no problem with it. So just
Cool.
just a few more questions. So
Yeah.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask this. One more day.
Yeah.
Do you find it weird that fans still find it contentious more than a decade later?
16 years later.
Yeah.
60 years later. So I have a few thoughts on this. Number one, when we did it, we knew it was going to be contentious. Absolutely. None of this is a surprise. The thing about Spider-Man fans, and this is, there is a difference between Spider-Man fans and fans of any other character in comics. And I don't say this in a derogatory sense. I mean, like, it's a tribute to the character, that those of us that love the character take the things that happen to him and his universe personally, because we all see ourselves inside of that suit. We all see ourselves as Peter Parker. By the way, I also think that's the beauty of the construction of Miles Morales as a character. They managed to tap into that everyman quality where we all see ourselves as Miles, right? And so every generation of Spider fans grows up with their version of Spider-Man. And when those things get changed or altered, it becomes personal. And I get it, right? I get it. And the switch that flips is that we, the creators, who are the fans, perceive Spider-Man as a three-dimensional flesh and blood. Peter Parker is a three-dimensional flesh and blood human being who walks amongst us, right? Who's got crappy stuff that happens to him. And then they view us creators as two-dimensional villains on paper who are twisting our mustaches, saying, ha, 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 look what we did to your favorite character, which is, of course, not the case. But I understand the impulse. So the fact that what's very interesting is that over the course of these years, because, of internet and trolling and, God forbid you say something that goes against, whatever thinking is, the popular thinking at a time, I can't tell you how many people come to me at a signing and go, and literally, but it's like a drug deal, Theo. They lean in and go, so I really liked One More Day. And they look over their shoulders like it's like the spider police is going to come to bust them, right?
They can't have the other man hear them.
Right. And so, but I remember when One More Day came out, Tom DeFalco, who was the editor-in-chief, who's two editor-in-chiefs prior to me, right, who I love dearly, came into my office one day, and I just knocked on the door, I peeked in, and he goes, thank you. Like, thank you for what, Tom? He's like, nobody's talking about the Clone Saga anymore. And I just burst out laughing, right? Because before One More Day, Tom was the most hated man in comics for the Clone Saga,
Yep.
right? That generation of Spider-Man fans just weren't having it. Now they look back on the Clone Saga and like, oh, it's kind of fun, So I saw Zeb Wells recently, like 2 weeks ago. I saw Zeb at a party, and I went, Zeb, like what? I'm like, thank you. Why? I'm like, nobody's yelling about One More Day right now. And he starts laughing. And then I tell him the Tom DeFalco story. I'm like, I'm just paying it forward, man. But again, it's not symptomatic. It tells you how passionate Spider-Man fans are. But my goal as editor-in-chief was to make sure that Spider-Man was back to how he was originally intended to create to be, because the history of the marriage was a publicity stunt, a rushed publicity stunt. It wasn't meant to happen. But now you have a generation of people that grew up with this marriage and stuff, and it didn't allow us to tell the best Spider-Man stories possible, right? People look, there were things online about like, the reason Quesada wanted to have Peter be unhappy is because he's been divorced several times, and I'm thinking, okay, so hang on a second. So you think that I would want to put my unhappiness onto a fictional character? And you think Marvel would allow me to do this? And oh, by the way, I've never been divorced. Um, it's just, but there were all these crazy theories where literally what I was looking at was the health of the character and the future of the character. And I knew that, it'll be a generation or two that eventually will not know a married Peter Parker and prefer him the way that he was actually meant to be. Um, and so that it's a I watch it with great interest. I watch people tell me how upset they are about a breakup that happened 16 years ago. That is probably I remember I think I broke up with a girlfriend 16 years ago. I just don't remember still lingering on it. It's that personal to Spider-Man fans, which again, it's a testament to the character. It's a testament to the fans' love of the character. And I just view it with like it's like something that I've never seen before. And now Zeb is getting it, right? And 10 years from now somebody else will get it, because change is hard. Change is a tough thing, but he's also writing a great Spider-Man story. So I'm just sitting back and reading and enjoying it.
Yeah, I will admit, I stopped reading after One More Day. I was one of the back in '07. But again, that's after Civil War and everything. And again, like you said, Peter's identity and everything else wasn't meant to last forever. And some type of way it had to revert. And
yeah, and the thing is this, that there were two ways to write the marriage, right? One is you're happy-go-lucky, nothing ever goes wrong, right? Which after a while, from a dramatic point of view, storytelling point of view, becomes tiresome and boring, and people would lose interest in those characters, especially a guy that jumps out of the window to save other people's lives, leaving behind his wife. The other way to write it would be to write a relationship where there was a lot of strain and stress and bickering, and in which case, what are you saying about marriage, right? I remember it was Chris Rock had a bit in his comedy routine where he said, my life as a married man, this is before he got divorced, of course, my life as a married man is so much happier, so much more stable. I love it. It's like my life as a single man was much more interesting. Makes for greater stories. I tell better stories when I was single because when I'm married, I'm happily married. Really, it's just I'm happily married. And some people may say, well, what's wrong with doing that? Well, there's nothing wrong with it, but we're looking for dramatic tension, right? So, Peter and Mary Jane getting into a situation where, as a married couple, one of them says, well, if you don't fix this, I'm leaving, right, is very, very different than as a couple that's dating and one of them saying, well, if you don't fix this, I'm leaving, right? And you don't want a divorce. And then I didn't want to kill Mary Jane off. There was so many of these things, but the truth of the matter is that the decision was made upon the fact that ever since I've been up at Marvel as a freelancer, every editor-in-chief was looking for a way out of this marriage, every single one of them. They just didn't know necessarily either how to do it or didn't feel like they could get away with it once it was done. But from the day they got married, everybody knew it was a mistake. Everybody. And so I felt like Marvel, myself, had earned enough credit that we could take the shots to the jaw, which inevitably came. And it's fine. It was fine. But we got it done. And I think Spider-Man, the character itself, is much healthier this way, because the other thing to look at is there's not a single portrayal of Peter Parker as Spider-Man. I mean, it's different in Miles because it's a future Peter, blah, blah, blah. But he's always single. He's always a young man, single, trying to make his way in the world, And like I told fans, nothing says that he and Mary Jane can't be together. It was just the whole marriage thing that was a real issue to get around in terms of like long form storytelling.
It was an albatross.
Yeah, and look, I get it. Some fans wanted, I want Peter to grow old with me. Okay, that's fine. So, two things. What about the kid that wants to pick up Spider-Man for the first time tomorrow, right? The 8-year-old kid who might want, or the 10-year-old kid. And secondly, to what extent should he become a father and then a grandfather? And does he die? I mean, how far are we taking Peter Parker with you, right? So I understand. Again, I understand a fan's feelings about that, but at Marvel, we have it's long term thinking. It's the health of the characters moving forward. So you try not to age them too quickly. We can do alternate universe stories where they're as old as we want, but for the core characters and fans that are fans yet unborn, we have to
Yeah.
think about those kids.
Yeah, and eventually I came back to Peter and Spider-Man,
Yeah,
because again, there was the outrage, but as the story evolved and as me as a reader evolve, you kind of take that different look at
yeah.
at what happened and possibly how it happened. And while you still may, you got to
Yeah.
understand, you got to go with the story too. You got to go with the story.
Listen, I had people yell at me because I Wolverine stopped smoking. Nobody cares about Wolverine now. I mean, really, nobody remembers. I mean, fans say he used to smoke. Yeah, you can look at some of those old issues. He smokes like a fiend. Same
Oh
thing with
yeah,
Nick Fury. Nobody cares anymore. But it was. I'm like, really? You guys are pro smoking? Wow. Okay. But again, I just know it's change. It's outrage, and it's all okay. That stuff doesn't bother me an iota, to be honest with you.
so this is going to be my last question.
All right.
So you walked away from Marvel. Well, you've left Marvel. You're doing your thing with Amazon, but you're being more of a creator now. You're drawing more. Are you happy to be drawing more again?
Oh yeah, no. I mean, look, well, first of all, it's not like I left Marvel for Amazon. The Amazon thing came after,
Right.
right? That it was knowing that I was free that people started calling me, and Amazon seemed like a really like the best place for me to start. I work with them. I'm exclusive to them, but the thing that I found, um, Marvel and I parted ways. I think next to Stan, I may be the only editor in chief that walked away kind of unscathed. You know what I mean? Like I love my friends at Marvel. I love the characters. I love the company. I love Disney. I've got no issues. They gave me a life that I could never have had. And I still work for them. I still do stuff for them. So and I got a lot of friends there. So I'm always rooting for Marvel. And but the first thing that became clear was when I started getting calls to do other projects. I'm like, oh wow, this feels really really weird. When I got the call to do the Batman covers, and I was working on my first Batman cover, I emailed Marie Javins and Ben Abernathy, my editor, and I said, this feels kind of naughty. It feels like I shouldn't be doing this. You know what I mean? I feel and the one thing that was a real surprise was, um, I was fully expecting the creative autonomy and all those sort of things, and it's nice to do stuff that's my own at this point. But it was having meetings with people. Again, during my tenure at Marvel, people would meet me and say, "Hey, could we coax you to come here, to come there, or do this?" And I'm like, "Guys, I'm exclusive to Marvel. I can't even hear this offer. I just stop, right?" And I was even with friends. I couldn't talk to them about certain things. And I remember having lunch with a pal of mine who would ask me to do a few things. I'm like, "You could ask me anything you want right now." And I was like, wow, that's a weird feeling, right? To just be able to take in offers and listen to them and not immediately just say, I don't want to leave my job, right? So I keep telling people it was like being married to the same creative wife for 22, 24 years, if you count Marvel Knights. And now I'm playing creative Tinder, and it's kind of fun, just to see what's out there. Oh, okay. Oh,
Swipe left,
um,
swipe right.
yeah, and also doing my own personal stuff, which I've been putting on hold for a long. I mean, I knew this day was coming, so I have a laundry list of personal projects that I wanted to do. So I'm working on those, and and even my exit from Marvel, that was already a 2-year conversation with our CEO Dan Buckley, before we got to that point. So I'd done, Brian Bendis was the guy who drove it home one day when we were just talking about where we were in our careers, and he said to me, he's like, "What?" Just to ask you, what do you have left to do over there? What haven't you done? And I never thought about that. And it really hit me home. And it's just like, yeah, I've kind of done everything to do at Marvel, and being very goal oriented. I'm like, maybe I'm just treading water. So maybe, we're getting close to that time. And then, COVID and all that other sort of stuff sort of derailed a lot of things. But yeah, I'm having a blast. I'm working harder than ever. And I think my new goal is, like I said, we were at Marvel. You're a creative trust fund baby because you're given this bank vault filled with beautiful and rich characters in a universe. You just inherit it, and then it's up to you to see if you can make it more profitable and healthier. But you're always a Marvel trust fund baby. So I'd like to see if what happens with my stuff without the Marvel brick as a net or a DC, bullet as a net, and just see, if I could land that, whatever triple, quadruple spin on the trapeze and nail it, without without that muscle behind me. So, it's kind of a test for myself.
Well, I will definitely have your Twitter information. I will have your Substack information in the show notes so that fans can follow and subscribe. Because I'm definitely interested in that that course you're looking at redoing again. That is very interesting.
It's just a matter of typing it up. I have it typed up somewhere, but it's like turning it into a post. The other thing about the Substack is that it's free. So there's no charging for it. There's no subscribing is free, and it's just me talking, tell some stories, giving folks whatever knowledge I've acquired. Your mileage may vary, depending on what you want to do and whether you like what I'm preaching or not. But I'm just having fun talking to fans and just putting some of that history out there from my point of view, and because people like yourself, fans out there, you guys have given me this career, this life. You pay my rent. And I wouldn't be here without any of you. So that's why I don't charge for this, because I just figure, you guys have bought enough stuff for me, and maybe you'll buy some stuff in the future, but I got to give something back. So that's been the best part. It's just like the engagement with folks saying, "Oh man, this is fun, cool." That's all I want to hear.
That's great. Joe Quesada, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful experience. I will see you in a couple of weeks in Toronto at the Metro Convention Center, and we'll have a follow-up conversation on that Marvel Knights for DC question. And
I'm going to think about this, and I'll give you my answers, and then you could talk about them in some subsequent podcast or whatever it is that you're, is this a podcast or is it be both?
It's a podcast. It's a podcast.
Cool. You can go to town, man.
Oh yeah.
But this has been a pleasure, man. Thank you for the questions. Really insightful. Thank you. It's always enjoyable.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Awesome, man.
So again, I hope you guys enjoyed that interview between me and Joe Quesada. I want to thank him again for taking time out of his busy schedule to sit down with me. And I also want to thank the folks over at Fan Expo HQ and Touchwood PR for making arrangements and getting Joe and I connected so that we could sit down and talk. Again, that was quite a conversation. I truly enjoyed it and truly appreciated him taking the time to answer the questions that I had. And I would have been remiss, as I mentioned, if I didn't bring up the One More Day controversy that has plagued Spider-Man for all these years. And he had wonderful answer to it. It's something that I never really thought about. Not totally sure I 100% agree with it, but it makes total sense with the way that he explains. But again, thanks to Joe, thanks to the folks at Touchwood PR and Fan Expo HQ. Again, if you guys are going to be in the Toronto area this weekend, actually beginning this Thursday, stop by the Metro Convention Center, visit Joe's table, visit all of the other guests and panels that they're going to have there at Fan Expo Canada, beginning this Thursday through Sunday at the Metro Convention Center. So, what's been going on here at the Comic Bin? Well, there's been a couple of things that have kind of caused me to be on hiatus, at least with the Comic Bin. And it goes back a few months, so actually it goes back a few years. So, as many of you know, for the past few years, I've been contributing to the Batman universe, either as a comic book reviewer or as a podcast host. As you know, I am one of the co-hosts of the Batman Universe comic podcast with my friends Ian and Steph. But a few years ago, I actually partnered with the owner of the website and was more or less a silent partner as he ran things. Well, earlier this year, the founder of the Batman universe, Dustin, decided to move on into the next phase of his personal career, and he stepped down from the website. And in doing so, he presented me the opportunity to take the reins as editor-in-chief over there. So I am now in dual roles as editor-in-chief, not only at the comicbookspot.com, which is the home of this podcast, but also serving as the editor-in-chief over at the batmanuniverse.net. And so I've been away just learning the ins and outs of how the site was run and getting feedback from the staff there with regards to their roles and what they do and why they do it and where they would like to see things go, and then just putting thoughts into what's next, not only for the Batman universe, but also for the Comic Book Spot and in turn the Comic Bin comic book podcast as well. And so, first of all, the Comic Bin isn't going anywhere. I hope to be back on a more regular schedule with episodes and actually having more folks involved in the podcast. But you're going to be seeing a lot more. I am, if you actually go to the website right now, at the comicbookspot.com, you'll see that we're kind of linking things between the two sites, as I have been posting articles from the batmanuniverse.net over there as well. So we're expanding and we're growing, and so we're not going anywhere. We're actually getting bigger, and I hope that you all hang on with us and actually become a part of this family that we are growing. We are looking for more writers. If you are interested in writing reviews or articles, either for the Batman universe or for the comicbookspot.com, reach out to me either at TBU at the batmanuniverse.net or at Theo at the comicbookspot.com, and I'll get an application over to you so that you can hopefully join the staff and be a part of the family. Again, we're looking at doing a lot of great things as we meld these two sites together and make it a huge family for comic book fans near and far. So that's what's been going on, and like I said, I am not going anywhere. We're going to be getting back on schedule with episodes of the Comic Bin comic book podcast, and I hope you continue listening and supporting the show. But that is going to be it for this episode. Again, I want to thank you all for your continued support. And until next time, keep reading those comics.